What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with a look at recent sales over at ComicLink. I try to make one of these videos once a month or so, and there were some really big books this month in high grade, and I don't have only 9.8s for those of you wondering, but we're going to look at mainly Amazing Spider-Man books, a lot of Star Wars books that sold, and a few X-Men Wolverine related key books. So I hope you enjoy this look, and in general there were some pretty good deals here, and the prices were definitely down versus even last month. So me personally, I've kind of decided that this year, if I'm gonna get any really big books this year, now's the time to do it, just because prices are down, way down from their highs. And to me, I want to get certain really big books for my collection, and I feel like the price points are really attractive right now, for the most part, not for every book. But let's go ahead and start with Amazing Spider-Man books. We're going to start off with some Silver Age keys, and this is one I was kind of watching because one of my goals for this year, as I told you towards the beginning of the year, was that I wanted to get another first appearance Spider-Man book for some of the big villains. And, we're talking like the very early Silver Age books, whether it's Electro or Green Goblin or Sandman, one of those big ones I'd like to pick up this year in a decent mid to high grade. And they are expensive, as I've talked about. They're very, very pricey books. But this is one that was on my short list, and it was Amazing Spider-Man number 9, off-white to white pages, origin and first appearance of Electro. And before the auction even started, I was like, if it's around $4,500, maybe I pull the trigger. I don't know. It ended up not working out for me because I just didn't have the funds available, because I put it towards some other books that I wanted more. But, it ended up going for $46.76. So a little bit higher than what I was willing to pay. And keep in mind that whatever that winning bid is, you do have to pay 3% on top of that for the buyer's premium. Now, there is a way to get around that 3% buyer's premium. If you win an auction or 2 or 5 on ComicLink, when you check out, if you check the box that says check, personal check, then you can either wire the funds to ComicLink or send a personal check by mail. As long as you do it within 7 days of the end of the auctions, then they waive the buyer's premium. So that's kind of a nice way to save some money. And it doesn't make sense a lot of times, but if you're just buying like a $150 or $200 book, it's kind of more of a pain in the butt than to send it off and kind of wait versus just putting it on your credit card. But 3% on $4,600, I mean, you're talking a lot of money there. That's what, probably $120 or so or more. So you can save some money if you do end up getting some big books on ComicLink by paying by check at checkout instead of by credit card. So just a tip that I used for some books that I picked up in this auction. Next up, we had an Amazing Spider-Man number 10. Now, this is the first appearance of Big Man and the Enforcers, and they're not big characters nowadays or have ever really been, but for Spider-Man Silver Age collectors, this is kind of a pretty well-known book, and it does have some historic appeal to it. It's a great cover, obviously, but in terms of the villains being kind of relevant today, I don't know if that's really really the case. This is more just for those that really love these early Spider-Man books with classic covers. This is definitely one of them. This was 9.4 with white pages, and that one sold for $46.76, the exact same price as the Electro first appearance ASM number 9. So potentially it was the same bidder, who knows. Here's one I do have in my collection in a lower grade, admittedly. This is an 8.5 white pages for ASM number 41, the first appearance of Rhino. Great book. I love my copy. I think mine's a 7.0 in white pages. But this one was an 8.5, and it sold for $25.50, and that was kind of the number I was thinking. It was going to be around $2,500. But at the time, I didn't have enough money for an 8.5, and a 7.0 came up. So I was like, you know what? At least I can get a 7.0 in white pages. Maybe one day I upgrade it. It's kind of low priority, but it's a book that I wouldn't mind having a higher grade for just because it's such a classic, and Rhino's still relevant today. I mean, he's going to appear in the new Craven movie that's coming out, I think, this fall. That actually looks pretty good, if you ask me. I'm excited about it. Next up, we had ASM number 121. This one is a 9.8 with white pages from 1973. This is The Death of Gwen Stacy. So very iconic cover, and obviously the storyline is iconic. It was depicted in some of the early Tobey Maguire. Was it Tobey? No, it was the Andrew Garfield, I believe. I think it was the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie. And again, 9.8 off-white to white pages, very high grade. There's not many of these in a 9.8. And this one sold for $6,300. So when you start getting up into those 9.4, 9.6, 9.8 for these Silver Age keys, this is really a Bronze Age key, but you really have to pay some money because there's just not many of them in a 9.8 on the census. But that's a pretty iconic cover. I don't need a 9.8, okay, but I wouldn't mind a 9.4 or even a 9.0. So that's a great book. That's one I want to get. Likewise is this one. I actually like this cover better, which is 122. And this is kind of when Spider-Man gets his revenge for Gwen Stacy's death. And this issue features the death of the Green Goblin. And obviously this was also featured in the Spider-Man movies that one was with Tobey Maguire, I believe. But anyway, I actually love this cover more. This is one I'd love to have, not in a 9.8. This one did sell for $33.06 though, which is actually quite a bit less than I was expecting. A little bit of a miswrap. You can see how the wrap on it is not perfect. It's a little bit of a miswrap at the top, but still it's a 9.8. I mean, there's not many of these in a 9.8. And pretty iconic cover from John Romita. So maybe one day for me, but not in a 9.8. That's a beauty. Next up, this is one I do have in a 9.4 with white pages. This is a 9.8 of ASM number 129, the first appearance of the Punisher. This book is in free fall. It's really dropped in price. A 9.8 with white pages, this time last year was probably around $28,000. And then a couple of them sold at Hakes for $26,000. This one sold for $22,350, which I thought was an incredible deal for what it is. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not buying a $20,000 comic book, but this one was freshly graded. You can tell by the serial number for it. Really nicely centered, great colors. I mean, not anything wrong with it that I could tell. To me, this was a great buy at $22,000 if you got those kind of deep pockets, because just even last month, I believe, there was one that sold at $26,000 over at Heritage. So that's the lowest price I've seen for a 9.8 for this book in a while. So great deal there. Next up is another one on my short list for potentially this year. We'll see how it goes, but it's come back down to earth a little bit. That's ASM number 194, the first appearance of Black Cat. I love her as a character, Felicia Hardy. And they had both the direct edition as well as the newsstand that sold. This is from 1979. This one is the direct edition. It has the slash through the barcode. So this is how they used to handle direct editions in the late 70s as they were transitioning over to the industry was becoming more and more direct versus newsstand. So this one is the first appearance of Black Cat, freshly graded as well. So this one was on my list, but I just couldn't make it happen this time. And it sold for $2,100. The newsstand also did sell for $23.22. So not much more, but that one is the newsstand and was freshly graded as well. Again, those prices are well down. Even on Instagram last month, they have sold for as high as $3,000. So both of those sold for well below my expectations. And I think now's a good time to get it. I mean, just get in there and grab one. There are a lot of them on the census. They come up almost every month on all of the big comic auction houses. So it's not like they're hard to find. But if it's a book you like, then, adjust your budget accordingly for whatever grade you want. But I do think that now's a really good time to get it in a 9.8 or 9.6 or whatever your budget allows. But hopefully this year I can pick up one of them. It doesn't have to be a newsstand, but I'd be happy with a direct edition too. And the prices now are much more attractive than where they were even a month ago at $3,000. I mean, I saw one that sold on Instagram listed for, I think it was $3,000 or $3,100, and it sold in 15 minutes. So now's a great time, I think, if they're going for, that much of a drop in 30 days. So that's one I'm going to keep on my short list. ASM 300 is another one you guys know I'd like to pick up, and this just shows you how much the price can vary for a direct edition depending on how well it's centered, how clean the edges are. And a tip that I talked about in past videos, when they're recently graded like this, CGC now does a high resolution scan for any submission. So for both of these that sold, they had high res scans of the front and the back on CGC's website if you look up the certification number. This one had a really bad cut on the pages, and it was very jagged. You can't see it in these photos, so that's why you have to go to the CGC website to check it out. And so this one was one I'd already written off as like, I'm not going to bid on that because the pages were so jagged, and it's not CGC's fault that it got the 9.8. They do give it a 9.8 if it has a blunt blade that is used to cut the pages when they were originally manufactured in the printing factory. And I think it was My Comic Shop Canada mentioned that fact. And you do see it on ASM 300s. You see it a lot on Hulk 340s. Both direct and newsstands, apparently. I don't see it as much on the Hulk 340 directs, but I do see it a lot on the newsstands, where it's just kind of like, it looks like it was hacked instead of a very clean cut, and the pages, as a result, are very, very jagged. And so this is one of those where, again, you can't see it based on this photo, but if you go to the CGC website, you can see the you know, when you zoom in, you can really see how unclean or how dirty and jagged the cuts are. So I had written this one off, and it sold for $2,700, which is kind of below the fair market value for this book, which is around $3,000. Now you compare that one to this one. This one also sold this week at auction, and it's the same book, same grade, also freshly graded, but that one sold for $3,300. So you're talking a $600 difference in the same week for the exact same book, same grade. So that just shows you that not every 9.8 is graded equally, or is equal. It's graded equally, but it's not equal, because you got to zoom in on the photos. And again, it's not a knock on CGC, because they're only going on what is factory fresh. And just because it's not cut correctly or cut as cleanly, they're not dinging the book. In my opinion, they should knock it down to a 9.6. That's my personal opinion, but I'm not a comic expert. Okay. So that's my personal opinion on it. Now, this is one that the colors were a little bit faded, I thought, and it still wasn't a super clean cut on the pages, and it was nicely centered. If you look at the 300 going all the way up, it was pretty nicely aligned. So this one was close. I was thinking about it. It just didn't work out for me, because I put my money towards some other books in this auction that I wanted more. And, you know, this one's on my short list. I hope I get it. And that $3,300 number is kind of like the max I would pay right now. This time last year, they were going for $4,000. Now they're going for between $3,000 and $3,300, depending on how clean and centered it is and how bright the colors are and things like that. So it just depends on how picky you are. And I think for me, if I'm going to get one, I'm going to make sure it's what I consider to be a really nice copy. Next up is ASM 316 in a direct edition. This is one I do have. This is a fairly famous Todd McFarlane cover. This is kind of the first full appearance of Venom on a cover, and he appeared as a headshot in an earlier book. I believe it was 299 or one of those. I can't remember which number it is, but it might have been 315. I don't remember. It was 315. That's right, because this is 316. 315, I think they showed his headshot, and then in 316 you get the full body shot of Venom fighting Spider-Man. So this is a direct edition, and you know, this one sold for $702, which seems really high to me, given that you can get this on eBay or on Instagram for like $550-ish, maybe $600 at the top end. So this was a lot. Now, it was really perfectly centered. It was also freshly graded. It did not have the factory defect that I could tell, where there's a slight mini bindery tear by the staple, and mine does have that, so I got mine for cheaper, I think. But this one looked to be pretty perfect, so I can see paying up a little bit for it. But 702 was definitely a little higher than I expected for 316. I wouldn't pay that if I were you. If you're looking for this book, try to pay in that $550 to $600 range, and if you're patient, they come up all the time. They're not very hard to find. Next up is another one I have on my want list. This is ASM 361, but in the newsstand. To me, if you're going to get this book, get it in the newsstand. This is the first appearance of Carnage, and this one wasn't perfectly centered, and it had a little bit of a miswrap down here at the bottom, but it's very minor. This is a book that's fairly notorious for miswraps, all kinds of wonky wraps, and this newsstand is one that I'd like to pick up. And it's very easy to find both in the direct or the newsstand. This one sold for $465, which is about fair market value right now. $465 at the top end, I think, is a pretty good number. Next up, let's dig into some Star Wars books now. Star Wars #1, a couple of issues sold. This one was a 9.8 with white pages, but it had a bad factory overwrap. You can see there that the white border is really heavily overwrapped. And so that kept the price down a little bit, but it was freshly graded. That one sold for $31.88. That's about, I would say, the low end of the market range right now for a Star Wars 9.8. Maybe you get lucky in a stealth auction on eBay. and get it for less, but it seems like they're going for between $3,000 and $3,200 on the low end. And then another copy sold. This one also did have a little bit of a miswrap on the going from top to bottom. The white was fairly nice. It was fairly clean. There was a little bit of bleed through on the S on Star Wars, but that's being very picky. So this one sold for a little bit more. It sold for $3,300 versus this one that had the bad overwrap that sold for $3,188. So about the same price, $3,100 to $3,300. That's about the fair market value right now for a 9.8 of Star Wars #1 with white pages. Next up, this is one I bid on, not for me, but my friend wanted this one, and he's like, hey, I'm not around the computer right now to bid on this. And I was. And he said, do you mind bidding on it for me? And I said, no problem. I'll bid on it for you. So this one was Star Wars 68. This is the harder to find Canadian price variant, though. And the price stayed really low. And if you'll remember from a couple of ComicLink auctions back, it might have even been the very last one of these sold in a 9.8 white pages for $3,300, if memory serves. It was around $3,000 plus. I know that. And leading up to the end of the auction, it was still really cheap. It was, relatively speaking, I should say. It was around $1,600 or $1,700 with a minute to go. And he said, go ahead and bid for me. I want you to bid $2,200. And I was like, look, man, I'll do it. But I'm telling you that I think that's too low. I think you need to go higher than that. He didn't respond to me in time, so I put in his $2,200 bid, and we did not win it. It ended up selling for $2,300. And there are $100 increments for these auctions on ComicLink once you get up into these big boy prices. So he did end up losing it. He finished second place, but this is the harder to find Canadian price variant. It was also freshly graded, because you can tell that because it has the newer label style that says first appearance of the planet Mandalore, first appearance of Mandalorians in comics. So that's how they just started labeling it on Star Wars #68. Great looking book. Very hard to find this one in the Canadian price variant. And unfortunately, we didn't win it for him, but I'm sure another one will pop up sometime this year. I mean, they come up every 3 or 4 months or so. But that's a beauty. And it did sell for $2,300, which again is well down versus the last one that popped up on ComicLink in the same grade Canadian price variant for over $3,000. So big price drop on that one. Next up, some other ones that have dropped a little bit. This one was Heir to the Empire in a newsstand. And this is one I actually just picked up in an eBay auction. And this one was going around the same time. The reason I didn't bid on this one versus the eBay one is because on eBay, I could put it on my PayPal credit and I could take 6 months to pay it off, versus this one I had to use my credit card and pay it immediately. So I didn't bid on it. They ended up going for almost the exact same price. This one sold for $900. I ended up paying about $950, or $940, I believe. So it was about the same price, more or less. And but this one is the newsstand edition, first appearance of Grand Admiral Thrawn and Mara Jade. And there's about 90 of these on the census right now for this 1995 Dark Horse Comics. Very tough to find mid to late 1990s books in a newsstand edition. So very happy I've got it, and I'm happy that it sold for around the same price. I paid a little bit more, but in my opinion, the way I look at it is I'm financing it, right, with 0 interest for 6 months versus having to pay for it up front. So there's some value there for buying it on eBay versus buying it on ComicLink, because there were some other books on ComicLink that I wanted more, and I didn't have enough to buy all of them in one go. So PayPal credit saved the day again for me, but I do have this one, and it ended up selling for around the same price at $900. Next up is the direct edition of Clone Wars 1. This is obviously the first appearance of Captain Rex and Ahsoka. This was, again, the direct edition, fairly recently graded. That one sold for $900. That is well down. I've been seeing more like $1,100 even on Instagram. $900 is a big haircut. So this book continues to drop like a rock, and I think that now's as good a time as any to grab it. Now that it's sub $1,000, to me that's a buy. But what do I know? People don't seem to care about Star Wars books right now, and when other people are fearful, that's the time to be greedy. That's what Warren Buffett always says, and that's the route I'm taking with some of these really big comics right now, because people seem to be very fearful when it comes to these huge holy grails, depending on your budget, of course. But for a lot of people, a $900 comic is a grail. That's a big purchase, and it is for me too. I'm not trying to put myself out of that category, because I consider it to be a grail too. So to me, you got to be greedy when other people are fearful. And right now, people are fearful about buying Star Wars comics. And I'm a buyer. I mean, that's just a fact. That's why I bought The Heir to the Empire #1 in a newsstand recently. Next up, Giant Size X-Men #1. This one was a 9.6 with off-white to white pages. This is the first appearance of the new X-Men and obviously the second appearance of Wolverine. Iconic book. A 9.6 usually goes for around $11,000 in white pages. This one had off-white to white pages and sold for $89.75. So a little bit of a haircut there relative to what Go Collect has as their fair market value. But this is another book that's dropping like a rock. Pretty good time to pick it up, in my opinion. 9.6 off-white to white sold for sub $9,000. And again, it was because the page quality was off-white to white versus the white pages where they're typically selling for around $11,000. Next up, I got some X-Men books. This was X-Men #12 in a 7.5 with white pages. First appearance of Juggernaut. Great cover, a nice secondary key because it also has the origin of Professor X. So it's got a lot going for it. Origin and first appearance of Juggernaut, origin of Professor X. That's a nice book right there. 7.5 with white pages is about as high as I could go. It sold for $18.77. So it's not on my big want list for this year, but it's one I'm tracking, and I bid on it early just to see where it ended up. I was hoping it would stay around $1,500 and maybe put a bid in, but just didn't work out. It sold for much higher than that at $18.77. Next up is X-Men #121. This is the first full appearance of Alpha Flight. Beautiful book from 1979, and one that is on my short list because it's dropped as well. This one sold for $8.99. $900 is the going rate right now for this book. It was going for $1,100 to $1,200 about 6 months ago, and so this one has taken a slight haircut, but held up fairly well, just given the overall downturn in the comic book market. So that's one I wouldn't mind having. It's got a pretty good census count and a census ratio for a 9.8 grade, so I'd like to pick that one up. Next up is one I did pick up. This is one I did pick up, and this is the book that I did pick up. I picked up 3 books in this batch, and I'm going to spoil it and show you one of them. This is X-Men #133 in a direct edition. It's not a newsstand. I wish it was. But this is the first solo cover appearance of Wolverine, and I felt like I've been letting my Wolverine comic book collection lapse over the last year or so. I really only picked up a Hulk 340 last year, which is the second fight between Hulk and Wolverine. And that was really the only, I think I had 2 actually. I had a Marvel Comics Presents #79, which details Weapon X and his origin story. And then I picked up Hulk 340 in a 9.8 direct edition. And that was it for Wolverine Key Books. And considering he's one of my favorite characters, I decided now's the time to do it. So I did pick up this one in a 9.8 with white pages, X-Men #133. Really great book, and I'm excited to get it. It's supposed to arrive tomorrow as of the making of this video, so I'm looking forward to showing it to you, along with 2 other really nice books. This one did sell for $900, so $900 was my price I paid for it, and it was ending, the auction was ending at like midnight, so I threw in a bid of $950, and I said, if it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And luckily, it did stick at $900. It had been going for around $1,100 to $1,000-ish max. And so I put in a $950 bid, and if I didn't get it, I didn't get it. So luckily, I did get it. So I'm excited to get that one. And it looks like a beauty, really nicely centered, pretty colors on that one. And that's, again, the first solo cover of Wolverine in comic books. Beautiful book. Next up is Silver Surfer #4 from 1969. This one had 8.5 white pages, and it's a pretty iconic battle between Thor and the Silver Surfer. Not really one I was targeting or anything, but I did kind of watch it because I love this cover. It's just such an awesome cover. And maybe one day, but this one did sell for $17.81, which was actually below what I was expecting. I was thinking it was going to go more like $1,900 to even $2,000, given that it was 8.5 white pages and freshly graded. I was like, man, that's going to go for a lot of money. And it ended up going for a lot, don't get me wrong, but it still went lower than I expected at $17.81. And then finally, I did want to document this Ultimate Fallout 4. This is the standard cover A, first print edition of Ultimate Fallout 4, the first appearance of Miles Morales. Look, I'm not saying now's a good time to buy this book. I don't know when a good time to buy this book because there's so many on the census. It keeps creeping down in price. But at the end of the day, I've got to be honest, I don't care. I want one of these. I want one of these in my collection, and you collect what you love. I love Miles Morales. I love the Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse movies. They are honestly two of my favorite movies in the last 5 years. They are just incredibly done movies, especially Across the Spider-Verse. I mean, I loved it. So I really want to get his first appearance in a first print, and the book keeps dropping in price. This one sold for $1,200. I've seen as low as $1,100 on Instagram. So this one is one I definitely want to get this year. I did bid on this one, and I did bid aggressively on it. I bid $1,100 on it. I did end up losing it at $1,200, but that's okay. One will pop up, and they always do. This was a beauty. It had a custom label with Miles on there. I just loved the way it looked. It was freshly graded as well. But it wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be this time, and I'm okay with it. I had my max price, and it got beat. And that's okay. So anyway, that's all I really had for this recent batch of awesome comic books over at ComicLink. And I'm excited to get my 3 books. And one of them is a massive grail that I cannot wait to show you. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll be back soon.